All right, so what I want to do right now is I want to create a JSON server. So I want to run, a basic HTTP server, and I want to serve up some JSON, and I want to have two different routes that people can go to. So if they go to one route, they'll get one JSON response. If they go to another route, they'll get a different JSON response. So there's a lot of ways we can do that, and there's there are whole frameworks built on doing things like this, including the Django REST framework, which we'll get into later in the course. But just as a kind of a bare bones example, we can do that right now. So you guys are doing HTTP server, which is very low level implementation. So I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use Python HTTP server, which is higher level, more abstract, but it'll kind of show us the components that we need to actually put together something like that. So let me share my screen. Okay, so here is Python. I think Tom showed you this, where you can run a basic HTTP server on the command line, and then you can kind of serve up files in whatever directory you're running it. Tom showed you that, right?
Yes, he did.
So we're gonna take that same module, but we're gonna customize it. So we're not gonna run it just as a command line. On the command line, we're gonna fill it out a little bit. All right. So you guys have used Postman, right?
Yes.
Yes, they went over it.
All right, cool.
I haven't used it, but I saw it being used.
Okay, yeah, we'll use it. You don't have to use it, but it's pretty convenient. All right, let's go here. I'm gonna do all right. So I'm gonna go to the documentation, HTTP server. So I'm just gonna copy this example. So we've got run, we need HTTP server and base HTTP request handler. So I'm going to import those from okay. So I have these.
I think the screen if I'm off, I don't think you're sharing the screen you wanted to.
Okay. Are you guys not seeing my VS Code?
We just see the browser and then two VS Code windows behind it.
Oh. Let me try that again. Okay, cool.
That works.
Okay. So yeah. So I went to the Python documentation for this standard library, HTTP, and then .server. And I'm just copying this from the documentation. And then I had to import these two classes. So from HTTP server, import HTTP server and base HTTP request handler. And you can kind of just take a look at this and see what it's doing. This is not, this is maybe a little bit of unnecessary indirection, but we have a server address. So maybe, I don't know if anyone can guess what these things are, but we have the server class, which is HTTP server, and we're creating an instance of the server, and we're passing it two things. One is this tuple, and the other is this handler class, which is this base HTTP request handler. And then once we create the server instance, we just run it. So this is all the default stuff. So what are these things probably?
The address and the actual port that you're gonna go into.
Yeah. So we're just gonna run this locally. So I think this will default to localhost. So I'm gonna leave that alone. The port number, what's the significance of the port number?
The port your server is going to be listening on for requests.
Yeah. So what is the port? I mean, I have local server, so I have like an IP address. Well, why do I have a port?
A port's like a door, so your IP address is your street address and the road you live on, and then what door you're gonna allow them to come in on. So there's 65,000 doors on an address, and you usually come into this one, and then that way you can kind of limit what's coming in, and only this type traffic can come in on this port, so you can kind of control it better.
Yeah, exactly. So it gives you, it gives you more fine-grained control, and as you mentioned, you can kind of do different things depending on what port you're at. And there's actually, so there's like 65,000 possible ports, and the first, there's some that are reserved. Typically you don't do stuff, below 1,000. But after that, it's more or less a free-for-all. There are some that are, some applications typically will use one or the other, and we'll see that later in the course. But so for one kind of the most common example is that normal HTTP will run on port 80. So any HTTP request, or like normal unencrypted request you make on the internet will default to port 80. And that's just kind of a standard thing. There's no real logic behind it. It's just what it is. And then for HTTPS, for secure connections, it's port 443. So over time, certain ports have certain associations, although there's nothing logically that makes one port better for that than another. Okay, so here's a port. We can leave it as 8,000. We can change it. So I'll just change it for the sake of changing it. So we're gonna run localhost. We're gonna run our server on localhost port 9999, and we're gonna create this instance of the server and pass it, I want you to run the server on localhost port 999, and anytime you get a request, I want you to handle it with this class, and then go ahead and run. So we'll see what happens. Python. I have to call the run, of course. Okay, so it looks like it's hanging. So this is running right now. I can open up a new window. I'm just going to use Postman. So I'm going to go to localhost 9999, and I'm going to make a GET request. And I get a response. So I get HTML as a response. I get this HTML page, and if I went in my browser instead, I would get the same thing. Except my browser wouldn't just give me the HTML, it would render it for me. But ultimately, this browser, if I go into the dev tools here, I can take a look around, and here's what's being displayed. If I go to network, I can make this request again, and I can see here's my request. I'm making a GET request to localhost port 9999, and so my browser is adding all of this stuff to my request, kind of behind the scenes, and I get a 501. So what's a 501?
Some sort of error. Oh, unsupported method.
Yeah. So what are the classes of, what are the basic kinds of errors that you can get? So there's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500.
200 is good.
Yeah, 200 is good.
400s are generally bad. I'm not for sure about 300s, but yeah, 400s, I think, just off the top of my head, is like not being able to retrieve resources.
Yeah.
And 200s generally okay, as it
Yeah.
says.
Okay, good. So 200 is basically everything's some version of everything's good. 300, does anyone know what 300 is? Anyone remember?
Redirections. I had to go
Yeah.
look it up.
Yes.
You don't see them too much.
Yeah. So 200 is, your request is good. 300 is a redirect, which doesn't have to be bad or good. It's just, just a redirect. 400 is basically there's something wrong with your request. Either you're not allowed to do this, or you're trying to request something that doesn't exist, or whatever. 500 is there's something wrong with the server. Basically. So 500 is, the server can't handle whatever you just did. In this case, an unsupported method get, and it's not implemented. So we get this HTTP status not implemented error. So has anyone, we haven't talked about this, by chance, has anyone tried using like an abstract base class in Python? Yeah, so it doesn't really matter, but in Python, it's possible to create a class that's kind of like a model for other classes that doesn't actually, you can't actually create an instance of it. But one of the errors you can get is a not implemented error. So if you try to subclass an abstract base class and without creating an actual instance of the method, then you can get that error. But anyway, that's kind of not relevant if you haven't done it. Okay, so we're getting an error that says our server basically can't handle a GET request right now. So we have a server running. It seems to be working, but it's missing some functionality. So we need to figure out a way to make the server handle a GET request. So we can look at the documentation. So here's the server class, and the server is good, it's working, but we need to handle, we're gonna have to somehow modify this handler. So if we look at the handler, base HTTP request handler, we'll see this class is used to handle the HTTP requests that arrive at the server. By itself, it cannot respond to any actual HTTP request. It must be subclass to handle each request method, get or post, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the handler will parse the requests and the headers. So can someone tell me about the request and the headers? So if I'm a client, I'm making a request to another server. What does my request look like?
Typically, it's a get followed by the URI.
Right? Yeah, so there's that protocol, right? It has to follow this protocol, which it's just strings, but it's still this protocol that people agree to follow. So it's the method name, which could be get. So if I go let me so I make this request. I have to follow this protocol. So this first line is going to be the basic request, and then here's the request header, and then we have a new line, and all this stuff is significant, right? The new line means now there's something else that's going to start, and in this case, I'm not sending anything else, so we're done with that. And then here's the body here's the request headers from the server, and then there's a new line, and then the body or the contents of the request. So this built-in base HTTP request handler is going to parse the requests and the handlers, and then call the method specific to the request type. So, by default, this base HTTP request handler is going to look at this line, and it's going to pull out this first thing, this get or post or whatever it happens to be. And then based on that, the method name is started from blah, blah. So, and then it's going to call a method on the class that's going to be do underscore whatever. So do underscore get, do underscore post, whatever that happens to be. So by the way, I'm showing you this. You don't need to, you don't need to become a master of Python's HTTP server standard library, but all this HTTP stuff kind of works the same. So just showing you the same stuff from a different perspective. Okay, so we're going to have to subclass this handler. So we're gonna have to subclass the handler, and we're gonna have to implement some kind of do get method. Class. And it's going to inherit from this. And I know that I'm going to need a method called do underscore. In this case, I just want to handle get requests. And it says it's called with no parameters. So now my handler class is going to be this. Are there any questions about what I just did there? Okay. So let's see what happens now. Okay. So now I have, let's see, a worse error, basically no error. And let's see if I try to go to it here. So I'm getting, so does anyone have any idea as to what's happening here?
Nothing was sent back, so
Yeah,
you might have sent a request, but once it got the request, it didn't do anything.
yeah. So basically my clients, so my web browser or Postman or curl or whatever I'm using, these are clients. And just like a server, a client has certain expectations for how messages are formatted, what the protocol is. And if you don't follow that protocol, then it doesn't know what to do. So, a client is a program that handles HTTP responses, and if you don't follow the rules or if you break the rules, so different clients will behave slightly differently. So you might play around with that as you do the challenges if you're interested. But certain kinds of things curl might allow that Chrome doesn't. but in general, yes. So we have the issue where we're not following the protocol. So what is the protocol? Well, we know that we're going to have to send something that kind of looks like this. It's going to have this line, and then maybe a header or two. Probably don't need all these headers. So let's look at the documentation some more. So there's a whole bunch of instance variables that we can access. So this is pretty convenient from us as consumers of this class. So we can subclass it, and then let's see what the client address is. So let's just print that out. Again. Okay, so I have printed this out. So what is this?
Localhost and the port.
Mm-hmm. So why is it why is it the way that it is?
I think it just picks one,
Yeah,
a random open port.
yeah. So when you make a request, so the server, I tell the server what port to use. But when I'm making a request on the client, basically my computer will just pick an open port, and it'll be different, or can be different, for every request. So the client port isn't really important, but the server port is. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. So we have this get method implemented, and now we can start doing some stuff. Let's take a look. Request line. You can take a look at the request line. And I get that. So get slash and then the HTTP version. And if I made a request to something else, then here I get that something else. Okay, so eventually we're going to want to handle 2 different routes. So we're probably going to need this, but let's figure out how to get, some kind of valid response first. Okay, so I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. You can check out the documentation, but so send response as a response header to the headers buffer and logs the accepted request. So when we send a response, we also have to send a response header. So let's try doing this. So the code and the message. So the code could be, depending on what 200, we'll just do 200 for now, but it could be anything. So we could examine the request and then determine how we're going to respond. Since we're on the server, we can control all of that. So that's send response 200. Or you can also do message. Okay. Now if I run this, let me do -B. Yeah, it's still, I'm still not following the rules enough for curl. Let me see if this works on. Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. So we're gonna have to do a little bit more, but we are actually sending some kind of response now. And now our server is logging that. Okay, so we have send response. We can also add headers. So I'm gonna add, there's a couple headers you should have, which is gonna be content type for sure. So it knows what to do. So self dot send header. And if we look at the documentation here, adds the HTTP header to an internal buffer, blah, blah, to be written to the output stream. Okay. So keyword should specify the header keyword with value specifying its value. So looking at a valid response over here. So content type is the header that we're going to need. In this case, we were requesting HTML. We want to do JSON. So same difference, but let's do content type, and that will be that is correct. Let's see if that. Okay, so we're getting there. I'm going to do, so we are sending the header. We're sending a response, which is the first line. We're sending a header. Now we want to, if we look at the format, the protocol, what do we have to do after our headers?
New line, character return.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to do some kind of new line. There'll be a break, and then we'll send the whatever message we want to send. So end headers. So we have a method here. Again, you could spend time looking this up, but end headers adds a blank line indicating the end of the HTTP headers in the response to the headers buffer and calls flush headers. So let's call end headers. Okay, so that time it works. I'm not actually really sending, not sending like a response body yet, but this is enough now. I'm following the rules enough that curl at least will, accept this. So I made a request, made a get request to / whatever, and the base route is localhost port 9999. I'm using curl, and then there's a new line which curl did all that for me, and then the response is the response which I'm controlling. This looks like some kind of default. I'm not sure where that's coming from actually. Here's where I sent this response header. So 200 with the message A-OK. I could have sent anything. So A-OK is not standard. So 200 OK is standard, but it's just text. So you can do whatever you want as long as your client can handle it. And this response, we'd probably do some kind of checking and then determine what response, what an appropriate response would be. But 200, we'll just do 200 as a default. And then this is some magic that's happening in the HTTP server class, which is adding this header and date, and then content type. This header I added specifically. So content type application JSON. Then I ended the headers, which is getting this new line. And so now we're done. Okay, so we've got this. Let's go ahead and try to send an actual JSON message now. So I'm going to import JSON. And let's say yes, this will be a dictionary. Okay, so I'm going to take this message, and then after I take care of the protocol stuff, I'm going to have to send this. So we can take a look at the documentation. And this is a little funky, but this is how we will send content. So it contains the output stream for writing a response back to the client. Proper adherence to the HTTP protocol must be used when writing to the stream in order to achieve successful interoperation with HTTP clients. Okay, so I'm going to send so self dot, what is this? W file. So this is an IO buffered. So it's basically like, it's kind of like a file. So it's going to have the same API. So it's got a write method, and that's how we're actually going to send stuff to our client. So we're going to write a response, and that response is going to be message. I'm going to turn it into from an object, or a dictionary into JSON. So JSON.dumps, and then the message, and we'll see if that works. So what type of thing is this now?
Is it a string?
Yeah. So this is going to be a string. So I've taken the object and I've basically turned it into a string. Okay, so now I got an error on the server. Let me try running it here. Okay, so notice that there's a little bit of a difference here, where I actually get an error here on the server, but I sent a 200 OK response. So the server is right here. Here are the response headers, application JSON, but there's nothing there. So it's a blank body. Okay, so this error is telling me that a bytes-like object is required, not string. So I'm trying to send a string, which you can't really do. I have to convert this. So I'll just encode it. Now I should be sending bytes. And if I try going here again, I get the actual message. So now I'm getting JSON back now. So this do get, we're sending the response line. We're adding this header to tell it what content type to expect. And then we're ending the headers, creating a new line. That's basically all that's doing. And then we're writing a response, which is a string, which I'm converting, a dictionary, which I'm converting into JSON, which I'm converting into bytes that I can then send over the network. And then the client will take care of putting that back together into a string. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So now we can handle get request, but I want to do two different things. So depending on where I go, what route I go to, I want two different responses. So I'm going to write two different methods for different routes. So def handle, we'll do handle users. And then okay. So these are going to be two routes. This will be /users and /pics. So this is, our imaginary application here. So I'm going to take all this stuff and I'm just going to paste it in here in each of these. I'm not going to worry about refactoring this right now. I'll include the message too. Okay. So depending on what the route is, I want to send. So if this is handle pics, whatever this, URL is, and then here, I'll just get a list of all users or something. Okay, so I'm going to get slightly different messages depending on where I go. Now this get, how am I going to know what route the user wants to go to, the client wants to go to? Well, I'm going to use, I'm going to have to look at this line basically. So I get that from request line. Request line, and then we'll just split it based on spaces, and it will be the first or the second element there. Okay, so that's the route, and then I'm just going to do an if else, and depending on what it is, so if okay, so now we've got this kind of controller logic here, which is going to take an incoming request and then it's going to figure out, it's going to hand it off to handler functions depending on what's in the request. So if we go to users, we're going to get one JSON response. If we go to pics, we'll get another one. You can do, all kinds of complex things here, but this is the basic idea. So I'm going to run this. And I'm going to go here and we get an error because we're not handling this null route here. We're going to go to /users and we get all users, and we go to /pics, and now we get this JSON response. Right? Are there any questions about that?
What is the JSON.dumps?
JSON.dumps just converts a a Python dictionary into JSON. So this method is not, it's not like the best named maybe, but yeah, dumps just means convert this thing into JSON.
Another question. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to follow along, and it's mine saying that JSON is not defined.
Did you import it?
That's it. That's the problem. Thank you.
Yeah, so JSON is part of the standard library, but you have to import it.
Got a question.
Yeah.
Is the do get method a built-in method?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it's implemented, but it says in the documentation that I think it will basically create, it looks like it kind of creates a method dynamically based on whatever that first parameter is in the line. So if you do get, it'll create a do get. If you do post, it'll do a do underscore post. So let's try doing something like, I don't know. I don't even know what this is. Prop find. So let's copy that. So let's try that. I'm not sure if it's actually kind of creating the methods dynamically, or if it just happens to have a list of every possibility. I suspect that it's doing it dynamically, but I'm not sure. But yeah, so this is something that you can think of it as you're overriding. So you have to have a do whatever, because that's just how this class works.
Okay.
You make a get request, you need to do underscore get. If you make a post request, you need to do underscore post. If for whatever reason you're doing a prop find, which I don't even know what that is, request, then you do underscore prop find. All right. And if you wanted to consume this, so you could also, so here's like our server, right? So we just created our API. So we've been using third-party APIs, right? You go to, cat facts or whatever, and you get a JSON response. So we just created our own custom API. So we can consume this from a web page now. So we could write a web page and then run it on another port. So if you use, let's just do that real quick. I'm going to run this on live server, which by default is going to use port 5. What is it? 5. Yeah, something like that. So now I have my web application, like a web server running on localhost, but on one port, and I have my server, my API server, running on localhost, but port 9999. So these two applications can now talk to each other. So I could write a web page that uses JavaScript that consumes this API, which you'll do for the challenge. There's a little trick though. There's some security features that are built into the browser. So you'll have to figure out that, but yeah, we can do that. All right, let's look at the challenge. You can read this. You're gonna get some code that there's a server and a database. You don't really need to worry about the database. Then it will tell you what you should focus on. So the server, you'll take a look. It's actually it's structured using the stuff we've been doing for the HTTP server 1 challenge and what we'll do for the following ones. So you can take a look at it, play around, add some print statements, and you're gonna have to modify this and add some functionality to handle routes. So you're gonna have to get responses based on if you go to different routes. And then, so as you're doing this, I would use probably Postman or curl. And then once you get it working, you can create a web page that will consume this stuff. And the error that you're gonna get is, once you try to consume your API from a web page that's also running on localhost, this is the error that you're gonna get. So you'll have to read up on that and give it a go. If you spend some time on this and can't figure it out, then let me know. All right, there any questions?